It was supposed to be just another Monday morning meeting at Glenmore Technologies, a place known for its sharp suits, bigger egos, and perfectly polished PowerPoints. The boardroom on the 42nd floor buzzed with anticipatory energy. Executives filed in, sipping espresso from company-branded tumblers and adjusting their silk ties. The agenda. It's a major restructuring proposal that could make or break several careers. James Whitaker, the youngest manager in the room at only 32, adjusted his cufflinks and smirked as he leaned over to whisper to his colleague, "Today's the day I show them what vision really looks like." He was hungry for a promotion, more than ready to throw some weight around. The meeting had barely begun when the door creaked open. Every head turned. In stepped Ms. Loretta. She was a small woman, no more than 5'3" with tightly curled silver hair, orthopedic shoes, and a Glen Marished custodial badge clipped to her faded cardigan. In her gloved hands, she pushed a mop bucket, unaware of the room's abrupt silence. A few people chuckled. Someone coughed to mask their laughter. The youngest executive, Whitaker, of course, leaned back in his chair and muttered, just loud enough for the room to hear, "Wrong room, Grandma?" A ripple of amusement passed through the boardroom, smized. Loretta blinked, adjusted her glasses, and looked around. "Oh dear," she said softly. "Must have taken the wrong elevator." "No kidding," Whitaker replied, trying to sound charming but landing squarely and patronizing. "This room's for people making decisions, not mopping floors." Several laughed, but not all. CEO Malcolm Green frowned from the head of the table. Before he could say anything, Ms. Loretta straightened her back and gave a quiet, almost imperceptible nod. "Well, since I'm here," she said, placing both hands on the conference table, "perhaps I'll stay a moment." Silence. Then laughter again, this time louder. A few confused glances bounced around the room. "Ma'am, it's a confidential meeting," someone protested, but Ms. Loretta ignored him. Her eyes moved across the screen where Whitaker's flashy restructuring plan was displayed in bold red. "Letters? Layoffs in R&D?" she asked, her voice calm. "That's bold, also short-sighted." Whitaker rolled his eyes. "Excuse me?" "Cutting 30% of the research department to boost short-term revenue," she said, tapping the table. "Sounds impressive in a slide deck, but tell me, what happens to your product pipeline in 18 months? The room was quiet again, but not with mockery this time. Whitaker looked momentarily unsure. "With respect, ma'am, I've run the numbers." "Sure you have," Loretta replied. "But numbers don't invent breakthroughs. People do. You want to cut the team that developed the adaptive neural mesh your marketing team has been bragging about for the last 6 months? That turned heads. The adaptive neural mesh had recently landed Glenmore a government contract worth millions. How? Do you know about that?" asked Malcolm Green, eyes narrowing. "I used to run the R&D division," she said plainly, "before most of you got out of grad school. Before my name was erased from your onboarding videos and the plaques and the PHRs and the old wing got taken down to make room for modern branding." Mouths dropped. Someone actually gasped. Loretta chuckled. "Oh, don't look so surprised. I co-founded Glenmore Technologies. But when my husband passed, I stepped away for a while. The board changed. I was voted out quietly while I grieved. Nobody objected. I didn't fight it. No one moved." Whitaker looked as if someone had drained all the blood from his face. "I never did like boardrooms much," Loretta went on. "Too much talk, not enough listening, so I stayed away. But I never left. Not really." "What do you mean you stayed?" asked someone near the end of the table. "I came back under a different name. Took a job no one noticed. Started watching. Listening. You learn a lot when people think you're invisible." She looked directly at Whitaker. "For example, you've been trying to tank your department's budget for 2 quarters. You want a buyout offer? You're angling for a pivot to competitor Virion." All eyes turned to him. He stammered, That's ridiculous, no, James," came the CEO's voice. "It's not." The silence that followed was thick, brittle. Finally, Malcolm Green stood up. He turned to Loretta and gave a respectful nod. "Ms. Loretta, I owe you an apology." She waved it off.
"Oh, don't bother."
"You didn't laugh. That counts for something still, if you'd be willing to. Step back informally. I think the board would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on long-term vision." She thought for a moment. "On one condition." Anything, Malcolm said. I want mentoring rights. 3 junior staff members. Bright ones. Overlooked female, preferably. Maybe a couple from backgrounds that wouldn't normally land them. Here, the CEO smiled. Done. She turned to leave, her mop bucket still sitting beside the table. Oh, she added at the door. Someone really ought to fix the leak in the men's restroom on 39 and clean out the vendor corruption. In your procurement team. Then she was gone. The boardroom sat in stunned silence. Whitaker, pale and shaken, quickly packed his tablet and left without a word. No one stopped him. That afternoon, the halls buzzed with a new kind of energy. Word spread fast. The janitor was no janitor. The grandma was a legend. And Glenmore Technologies would never see another Monday. Morning meeting quite the same again. Not after Loretta, not after the day they laughed at her and realized just how big a mistake that had been. Ms. Loretta had worked at Glenmore Technologies for 27 years. Most people only noticed her when she wasn't there. When a trash can overflowed or a coffee ring remained unwiped on a boardroom table. But she noticed everything. She swept the floors with quiet precision, emptied trash cans with practiced efficiency, and wiped down tabletops that had once hosted billion-dollar strategy sessions. But behind her unassuming exterior was a mind as sharp as the day she'd graduated. Summa cum laude with a degree in finance, most at Glenmore, never asked. Her name, fewer still, knew she once coned a successful logistics firm that employed over 100 people. They didn't know she once sat on panels, consulted for startups, and gave talks on scalable growth at conferences long before the phrase became a LinkedIn buzzword. That life had ended suddenly, with the kind of phone call that changes everything. Her husband Charles had been driving home from a client meeting late one rainy Thursday. The accident was fast, brutal, and final. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. Loretta had 3 young grandchildren under her care, their mother. Her daughter had fallen deep into addiction and had been absent for years. Loretta didn't think twice. She closed the business, sold the office, and moved into a smaller home with a sturdy porch swing and room enough for 3 small beds. She traded quarterly reports for bedtime stories, PowerPoint decks for peanut butter sandwiches. The business world barely noticed her exit, but her grandchildren would remember it forever. I'll come back one day, she told herself, when they're grown. And eventually they were. By the time the last one had left for college, Loretta was in her 60s. She looked at the job market and laughed to herself. No one was hiring senior women with career gaps, especially not in tech. So she did what she'd always done, adapted. She took a custodial job at Glenmore Technologies, not out of desperation. But by design, it was quiet, predictable, and it gave her time to think. At first, she kept to herself. She cleaned before dawn, took her breaks in the maintenance closet, and listened. Always listened. Her ears became her sharpest tool. Conversations from passing engineers, murmurs in the break room, whispers on the elevator, she absorbed them all like oxygen. In time, a picture formed. Glenmore was growing fast, but the foundation had cracks. Middle managers inflated numbers. Procurement officers signed off on shady deals. HR ignored harassment complaints. Ideas were stolen. Promotions went to the loudest, not the smartest. Filed it all away? The executives didn't see her. Not really. To them, she was just a sweet old lady who smiled and made coffee when the machine broke. They didn't realize that same lady read financial reports upside down when left on the table, could quote the company's annual earnings to the decimal, and mentally mapped departmental shifts by watching who changed badge codes on which floor. She learned the tempo of the company, who held real power, who was bluffing, who stayed late because they loved their work, and who stayed late because they were afraid. And slowly, Loretta began to guide. She left a folded napkin over a budget sheet. Someone had left behind because it contained private numbers a junior accountant didn't realize were confidential. She left a sticky note on an engineer's desk. Don't let them take your idea without putting your name on the patent application. No signature. Once, She overheard a shy intern practicing a pitch in the stairwell, whispering lines to himself like a prayer. The next morning, that intern found a folder on his desk with data projections and a note. Model your pitch after this format. CEO prefers clarity over charisma. Got the grant. To Loretta, it wasn't meddling. It was reckoning. It was what she'd always done: observe, anticipate, support. But still, she never sought credit. She wore humility, like armor. After all, Glenmore didn't want a hero in overalls. They wanted janitors who kept to their corners and didn't ask questions. That suited her just fine until the day of the Monday board meeting. Loretta never forgot faces. She remembered when Malcolm Green first joined Glenmore as a brash, 20-something analyst. He was green, but eager, and he'd once helped her clean up spilled printer ink without being asked. He didn't remember her now, of course, but he would. She remembered the day Whitaker was hired, too. Fresh out of business school, smug, talking loudly on his phone as if the office were his private showroom. He'd referred to her once as background furniture. She didn't forget that either, but she bore no grudges. Loretta understood that real power didn't come from titles or corner offices. It came from perspective, the kind only time could give. The kind you earn by watching how people behave when they think no one important is watching, and that's what she had been for years. Silent observer with a memory like a steel trap. Every betrayal, every ethical shortcut, every missed opportunity to do the right thing, she remembered it all. She wasn't collecting revenge. She was collecting context. People thought time dulled the mind. They were wrong. Her mind had only gotten sharper. What dulled people was entitlement, arrogance, the belief that status made them untouchable. Loretta had long since let go of her need to be seen. But she hadn't let go of her belief in justice and the potential of people. When Malcolm had asked her to return in an official capacity, she didn't say yes immediately. She took the afternoon to walk through every hallway of the company, watching how people greeted each other, watching who held the door open, who smiled at interns, who rolled their eyes at the cleaning staff. Then she said yes, but on her terms. She wouldn't take a corner office. She wouldn't wear a suit. Didn't want her name on a door. She wanted 3 mentees. Young, hungry, overlooked. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, but she also knew what it felt like to rise. She would teach them not just to succeed, but to observe, to think, to serve. Ms. Loretta may have pushed a mop, but she also pushed boundaries. She wasn't just a janitor. She was Glenmore's quiet guardian, its hidden historian. And now, perhaps, its conscience. It began with a simple task of spilled coffee report from the night shift. Room 4201, the executive boardroom is. Loretta had done this 1,000 times. Mop bucket, gloves, neutral cleaner, paper towels. Her steps were quiet, practiced. She didn't mind early mornings. In fact, she preferred them. Fewer people, fewer stares, fewer chances for anyone to ask her questions she didn't feel like answering. She was on her way to clean up a mess. She had no idea she was about to walk into one far bigger than she'd expected. The door to the boardroom wasn't locked. That was odd. Meetings usually didn't start until 9:30. It was just after 8 o'clock. She pushed the door gently, expecting an empty room with stale coffee and cookie crumbs. Instead, silence. Then 15 heads turned. To her, she stopped in her tracks. Her eyes moved quickly, the long oval table, the ceiling projector humming softly. The digital screen showing a bold title cue, 3 strategic realignment, internal review. At the head of the table sat Mr. Dalton, CEO of Glenmore Technologies. Round him were 14 department heads. White collars, clean shaves, Apple watches, and cologne strong enough to sting. All male. All dressed like they'd walked off a corporate magazine cover. All staring at her. For a few seconds, no one said a word. Then, from the far side of the table, someone muttered under their breath, "What is she doing here?" The words weren't meant to be loud, but they were loud enough. Ms. Loretta stood there, mop in hand, bucket beside her. A single coffee droplet still clung to her glove. She could have apologized and backed out quietly. She didn't. Her voice was calm, without tremble or hesitation. I was told there was a spill to clean in here. I didn't know this meeting had been moved up. Dalton gave a polite but dismissive nod. Appreciate it. You've got it under control. Another executive, younger, sharper in tone, added with a laugh. Yeah, don't worry about it. Just billion-dollar decisions in here. A few chuckles. Loretta's eyes scanned their faces. Not one looked embarrassed. She could have bowed her head. She could have returned to the closet, logged the incident as a scheduling error, and no one would have blamed her. But then she saw the spreadsheet open on the shared screen. Something about headcount optimization, new corporate code. When she heard it, she'd written that kind of code once. Years ago, it meant layoffs. And not just in the warehouse or frontline. She recognized several department codes: R and D, internal auditing. Compliance. She took a step forward. Is that the new redundancy matrix? She asked, gesturing to the screen. That got their attention. Mr. Dalton's head tilted slightly. Excuse? Me. Loretta removed her gloves. Her voice was still quiet, but carried weight. You're planning headcount reductions in 3 of the most essential departments, she said. And unless your forecasting model includes how many federal contracts you'll lose once those departments can't meet compliance deadlines or innovation benchmarks. You're about to take a long walk off a short fiscal cliff. Someone near the back of the room snorted. Okay, what does the cleaning lady have a degree in economics now? Loretta didn't flinch. Finance, actually. NYU, 1981. I interned. At Lehman Brothers, before most of you were born, ran my own business for 15 years after that. A long pause. The snorting stopped. I'm not here to cause a scene, she said. I was just trying to clean up someone's mess. Since I'm already standing in one. Dalton raised a hand, signaling her to pause. Ms. Loretta? Dalton studied her. You seem to have a strong opinion on our restructuring plan. I do. And on what basis exactly? She gave a small smile. I've been watching this company from the inside for 27 years. You just didn't see me, but I saw you. I watched which departments were consistently overperforming with fewer resources. I saw which middle managers took credit for their juniors' work. I saw who walked past harassment complaints and who shredded whistleblower memos. The air turned cold. No one was laughing now, Loretta continued. You think the janitor sees nothing? But I've seen more than most of you, because when you're invisible, you hear everything. Dalton sat back, visibly weighing his next words. Someone down the table, an older VP named Harris, leaned forward. You mentioned federal contracts. You're familiar with the procurement pipeline? I reviewed the vendor compliance logs every time I picked up shredded paper from your copier room, Loretta replied. Most people shred and walk away. But those logs showed mismatched vendor codes, dates that didn't align with shipment records, and purchases logged at 40% markup. Why didn't you report this? Dalton asked. I did, she said evenly. 3 years ago. Through the anonymous ethics line. Twice no response. I figured the system wasn't broken, just rigged. Another silence. This one heavier than... Before she picked up her gloves and mop handle, if you'd like me to leave, I will. Don't pretend you didn't hear what I just said. Dalton exchanged glances with 2 of his deputies. Then he motioned toward an empty chair. Oh, please, sit. Loretta raised an eyebrow. Stay for this part, he added. You've earned it. A few heads turned sharply in protest. Dalton held up a hand again. Let's hear her out. Loretta walked calmly to the chair and sat, her mop bucket parked beside her like a loyal dog. She gestured toward the screen. Let's start with your assumptions. Your attrition rate is modeled at 4.3%. It's actually closer to 6.1%. Your retention bonus plan isn't indexed for inflation. And your sales forecast doesn't account for the time lag between R&D output. In product launch, she looked up. You're not cutting fat. You're cutting muscle. And in 18 months, you'll be too weak to lift your own weight. Dalton nodded slowly. We'll take a break here. And when we come back, Ms. Loretta will help us reevaluate the strategy. Is that clear? No one argued. That mistake walking. Into the boardroom, an hour too early, changed everything by lunchtime. 3 directors had been called into private sessions. By end of day, the strategy deck was being rewritten. And Loretta, she didn't return to the janitor's closet. Instead, she spent the afternoon in a glass office overlooking the city, reviewing documents with a young analyst who'd once helped her carry a heavy bucket up the stairs. The company would never see her the same way again. The woman they almost laughed out of the room had become the voice they now leaned in to hear. Used minutes before Ms. Loretta had walked into the boardroom, the air had been electric with frustration. The quarterly numbers were worse than expected. Sales were down 12%. A major pharmaceutical client, once considered unshakable, had pulled out of their long-term contract. The company's stock price had dipped nearly 9% in a single week, triggering red alerts from investor relations. Confidence was evaporating fast. Inside the room, 14 department heads and one very agitated CEO scrambled for answers. "The market's shifting," said one executive. "Oh, it's the supply chain," said another. "The people aren't performing," chimed a third. "We need a more aggressive sales team." Ideas were flying like candy at a parade. Bad ideas: slashing headcount, freezing innovation, outsourcing tech support, running leaner, pushing harder, selling faster, spinning up vague buzzword initiatives like hyperagile vertical optimization. Mr. Dalton, CEO of Glenmore Technologies, had been unusually quiet through most of the chaos. But eventually he stood and said what no one else would. "No one really knows what's going wrong," he admitted, rubbing his forehead. "And that's the problem." The room went still. For a second, even the noise from the air vents seemed to hush. Then came the sound no one expected. A throat clearing, gently actually, said a soft voice near the corner. "I think I do." All heads turned toward her. To Ms. Loretta sat calmly, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't said much since being invited to stay after her unexpected entrance. But now that the room was crumbling under the weight of confusion, she leaned forward. The silence deepened. Dalton blinked. "Go ahead," he said. Loretta adjusted her glasses and began. Not with accusation, but with clarity. "Glenmore doesn't have a sales problem," she said. "It has a trust problem." A murmur passed through the room. "Trust?" VP scoffed. "With clients?" "No," Loretta replied. "With itself." She let the words settle. "You're trying to fix a bleeding artery by applying pressure to the wrong limb. The issue isn't the numbers. It's the culture behind them. You've created an environment where people are more afraid of being blamed than they are motivated to solve problems." Several executives shifted in their chairs. Dalton gestured for her to continue. "Departments don't collaborate," Loretta went on. "They compete. I've watched it for years. You all measure success in isolation. Individual KP is siloed. Dashboards, bonus-linked goals that pit divisions against each other." She turned her gaze toward the head of product. "You're judged by how fast you launch, not how well the thing works 2 months later." Then to the sales director. "You're rewarded for closing deals, not for whether the client renews after year 1. And to the VP of HR, you're praised for reducing complaints, not for solving the root causes of them." No one responded. Loretta leaned back slightly. Her voice remained calm, but carried the power of someone who had watched it all unfold. "You've built a machine that eats itself. Efficiency at the cost of loyalty. Output at the cost of purpose. Every team is optimizing in a vacuum. And now you're surprised the whole company feels like it's collapsing?" A pin could have dropped. Dalton finally spoke. "It's what's your diagnosis?" Loretta didn't hesitate. "You've lost alignment between leadership, mission, and people, and you've mistaken busyness for effectiveness." "Oh." A few heads nodded. Slowly she continued. "When the pharmaceutical client pulled out, did anyone ask why?" The CFO replied, "They said the implementation cycle took too long and wasn't aligned with their internal needs." Loretta raised an eyebrow. Translated, "You didn't listen to them." No response. She looked around the table. "Many of you talk to your frontline staff more than once a month. How many know what your customer support team is actually hearing from clients? When was the last time one of you sat in on a user feedback session?" No hands were raised. Loretta gave a small, knowing smile. There it is. Dalton crossed his arms. So what would you do if you were in my chair? Loretta paused thoughtfully. Then she spoke. First, I'd cancel every non-essential meeting for 2 weeks, reallocate that time for direct field observation. I'd ask every department head to spend a day shadowing someone 3 levels below them. Learn what's really happening, not what your filtered reports tell you. Murmurs of surprise again. Second, I'd publish a new rule. No metric is considered successful unless it aligns with 3 outcomes: customer value, employee well-being, and long-term sustainability. If it doesn't serve all 3, it gets reevaluated. Dalton nodded slowly, scribbling a note. Third, Loretta continued, I'd rebuild cross-functional teams not just for product launches, but for decision-making. R&D, sales, support, legal, they should all be in the room when changes are discussed. You need horizontal collaboration, not vertical hierarchies. And what about morale? Someone asked. Loretta turned to him. Morale isn't built with catered lunches and ping-pong tables. It's built with purpose. People want to know their work matters. Right now, half your staff thinks they're replaceable, invisible, or stuck. Fix that. Quiet settled over the room, but it was different. Now, not awkward. Not skeptical, hopeful. Dalton finally sat down, resting his elbows on the table, looked around at his team. She's right, he said. Every word of it. He turned to Loretta. You've just done in 10 minutes what our consultant teams haven't in 6 months? Loretta shrugged lightly. Sometimes you need to hear the truth from someone who's been watching. Dalton leaned back in his chair. I think it's time Glenmore got a new kind of advisor. Loretta smiled gently. I'm not interested in titles. Then how about impact? Dalton asked. A beat passed. Then Loretta nodded once. Impact, she said. That I'm interested in. That day, Glenmore Technologies took its first real step toward change. Not because of a new software rollout. Not because of a slick new strategy deck. But because someone finally listened to the quietest voice in the room. And because that voice, steady, unshaken, and wise, finally chose to speak. At first, the room froze. The executives exchanged glances. A few brows lifted in disbelief. A few mouths opened slightly in half-formed questions. Was she serious? Was this woman wearing a janitor's uniform and worn-out sneakers about, too? Give them a lecture on leadership? Yes, she was. Loretta didn't flinch. She didn't backpedal or soften her voice. She simply adjusted her stance, shoulders back. Chin level, and spoke like someone who had nothing to prove. Yet everything to say. I don't pretend to know everything, she began. But I've spent 27 years cleaning this building, and I've seen more from behind a mop handle than some people see from behind a glass desk. Silence. She walked a few steps closer to the long oak conference table, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. I've noticed the patterns, she said. Over time, they don't just repeat, they worsen. She raised a finger and counted off each point as she spoke. Sales teams spending more time arguing with each other than working together. I've heard the shouting matches through the glass walls, day after day. It's not strategy, it's ego. She moved to the other side of the room, locking eyes with the director who looked away. Customer service reps handling angry phone calls on speaker while managers walk by pretending not to hear. Some even laugh, like the complaints are a joke. Another step, another observation. I've watched junior staff nap during afternoon meetings, not because they're lazy, because they're exhausted, burned out. No one tells them what matters anymore, just that everything is urgent, and they better not miss a deadline. She paused in front of a whiteboard covered in half-erased ideas. I've seen open files and documents left on desks, project plans behind schedule, morale surveys unread, team notes begging for clarity and direction. She faced the room again, and then delivered the sentence that would echo through the walls of Glenmore Technologies long after she left it. You don't have a sales problem, Loretta said. You have a leadership problem. No one spoke. Even the CEO, Mr. Dalton, didn't attempt to interrupt. There was a gravity to Loretta, no, an undeniable presence. Like a tuning fork that had just struck truth. She went on. You keep pointing fingers at departments, at markets, at competitors. But the rot didn't start out there. It started up here. She pointed toward the ceiling, then lowered her hand and gestured around the room. In this room, the sting was real, but so was the respect growing behind the eyes of those who knew deep down that she wasn't wrong. Loretta didn't speak like someone angry. She spoke like someone disappointed. There are leaders here who think performance reviews are a once-a-year inconvenience, who promote based on proximity, not performance, who reward whoever talks the loudest instead of whoever works the smartest. A young executive tried to deflect. Well, with all due respect, leadership isn't exactly written into a cleaning job. Loretta smiled politely, the kind of smile that made people brace for the lesson behind it. You're right, she said. Leadership isn't written into any job. It's earned. It's demonstrated. And it's noticed if you're paying attention. She paced slowly now, more like a teacher in a classroom than a cleaner in a conference room. You know what? I've seen that you haven't, she asked. I've seen which junior employees pick up after others without being asked. I've seen who stays behind to help a struggling teammate without taking credit. I've seen who brings coffee for the receptionist in the morning, who thanks the security guards at night, who notices when someone's been crying in the bathroom. She stopped. Her next words landed like quiet thunder. Those are your future leaders. Dalton leaned forward, hands clasped. And what about us? He asked. Are you saying we're the problem? Loretta didn't blink. I'm saying, you're the root of the problem. You're the key to the solution. She softened then, her voice warmer but no less steady. People don't leave bad jobs, she said. They leave bad bosses. They leave toxic cultures. They leave when they don't feel seen, when they're not growing, when they're not trusted. She gestured to the screen at the front of the room. You can't fix this company with another flashy initiative. You fix it by listening, by being present, by getting your hands dirty. A hush swept through the room. No one laughed anymore. No one dismissed her. She wasn't the janitor now. She was the mirror they'd been avoiding. They didn't like what they saw, but they needed it. Mr. Dalton spoke carefully. If you were sitting in my seat, Loretta, what would you do tomorrow? She didn't hesitate. Start small, she said. One floor walk through every day. Unscheduled. No tie. Just listen. Talk to people. Ask how they're doing. Ask what's getting in their way. Pause. Then do something about it. Dalton nodded slowly. The room full of once cynical, posturing executives had become a different place. Quiet. Reflective. Some took notes. A few sat in stunned silence. One or two looked at Loretta as if seeing her for the first time. She began to leave, picking up her mop bucket. But at the door, she turned and said one last thing. Leadership doesn't always look the way you expect it to. It doesn't wear suits. It doesn't sit in corner offices. Sometimes it pushes a mop. Sometimes it just listens. Then she left. That afternoon, something shifted in Glenmore Technologies. Not on paper. But in people, the woman they overlooked had just handed them the truth. And whether they liked it or not, they knew one thing for certain: the smartest person in the room hadn't come from Harvard. She'd come from the janitor's closet, and thank God she finally spoke. One executive smirked, the kind of reflex born from years of sitting in rooms like this where confidence was currency and sarcasm was a shield. But before he could even draw breath to deliver a snide remark, Dalton raised a hand. Don't. The CEO said simply. The smirk disappeared. The room fell still. Dalton didn't know what it was exactly: her calm tone, her clear eyes, the sheer unapologetic weight of her words, but something about Loretta had him riveted. She didn't carry herself like someone who'd wandered in by accident. She stood like she belonged in that room, and deep down, he knew she did. Loretta took one step forward, mop bucket still beside her. Hands relaxed but firm at her sides. You're all sitting up here, she said evenly, throwing around numbers, graphs, and buzzwords, hoping one of them will fix a problem you haven't taken the time to understand. Someone shifted in their chair. No one looked directly at her. Not yet. But your real problem isn't the metrics, she said. It's your mindset. She let that linger. You've stopped listening to your people. You'll hear them when they bring good news, or meet quotas. But when they struggle, when they break, when they fall behind, you look away. You cut funding. You schedule another meeting. She looked around, making eye contact now. I know them, she continued, voice strong but not cruel. I talk to them. I clean up after them. I see the coffee cups with hand-scrawled pep talk, notes to themselves. I see the tissues in the trash bins after performance reviews. I hear them vent when they think no one's around. They don't trust this company anymore. That last sentence hit like a slap across the table. Dalton didn't flinch. He looked at her as if something vital had just clicked into place. They stay, Loretta said, because they need the paycheck, because they think no one's going to listen to them if they speak up, because they hope maybe one day someone up here will notice what's broken. Her eyes swept across the boardroom, 14 executives who were used to speaking, commanding, controlling, not being spoken. Two like this. You're measuring performance with dashboards. But the soul of this company lives in the break rooms, the call logs, the quiet conversations after hours, and none of you are looking there. Silence. Even the one who had smirked earlier now leaned forward. Pen poised in hand, but forgotten. Loretta let out a slow breath. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of watching a company with potential rot from the top because no one had the courage or humility to listen. Then she said the words that would haunt them, humble them, and eventually help save them. If your janitor knows more about your company than your executives do, you're not running a business, you're running it into the ground. Not a sound followed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from offense, but from recognition, from shame, from truth. Dalton sat back in his chair, staring at her like he was seeing the company's obituary being read aloud, but with time left to rewrite it. One of the younger directors coughed lightly. You've been observing all this? Loretta gave a small, matter-of-fact nod. For years. But no one asked. Dalton finally spoke. What would you do? He asked quietly. If you were sitting in my seat? Loretta hesitated, just for a beat, but only because she hadn't expected him to ask that seriously. Then she stepped closer. First, she said, I'd stop managing from the top of the tower. I'd walk the floors, not for show, for real. Ask questions, talk to the night shift, sit in a customer support cubicle and take calls. Learn what's broken before you try to fix it. She turned to the smirking executive who now looked chastened. Second, I'd stop rewarding those who look busy and start promoting the ones who make others better. There are people on your lower floors solving problems your VPs haven't even recognized yet. Another executive scribbled that down. Third, I'd build a culture where the janitor, the intern, the receptionist, anyone can speak up without fear. The ideas you need are hiding behind fear and formality. Dalton was listening, really listening now. He turned his gaze to the table. We've lost the culture. No, Loretta said gently. You abandoned it. Another silence followed. This one was different, not defensive, transformational. One of the executives finally broke it. It's a woman from HR, one of only two. Women in the room leaned forward. We talk a lot about transformation, she said slowly. But this is the first time it actually feels possible. Loretta nodded kindly. You don't need a transformation, she said. You need restoration. You've got good people. You've just buried them under the noise. Dalton stood then, straightened his tie, took a breath, and looked around the room like a man seeing a Tanda's team for the first time. He turned to Loretta. I want you in this room, going forward, said. Not as a guest, as part of our leadership council. A few heads turned, a few eyebrows raised. Loretta, ever steady, shook her head. I don't want a title, she said. Titles didn't get us here. Listening did. Dalton smiled. Then you'll be our listener-in-chief. The room chuckled lightly, genuinely. For the first time that morning, something had cracked. Not trust, not decorum, but the thick suffocating. A layer of executive delusion that had been hovering over Glenmore Technologies for far too long. That day. Things didn't change overnight. The stock price didn't suddenly rebound. Clients didn't immediately return. But for the first time in years, something far more important shifted. The leadership started listening, and it all began with a woman in worn sneakers, carrying a mob in the truth. Dalton leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table as if the weight of the moment demanded it. "Loretta," he said, his voice quiet but sincere, "would you be willing to help us fix this?" For a brief moment, the boardroom held its breath. Loretta glanced at the mop bucket beside her. It's the same bucket she had pushed through silent hallways for nearly 3 decades. She looked around the room at the suits, the faces, the same people who once barely noticed her. She could see the cracks now, but she also saw something she hadn't seen before. Humility. She hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll help," she said. "But I don't want lip service. I want action. Listening. Real change." Dalton smiled. "Then let's get started." Over the next few weeks, Glenmore's technologies changed in ways no one thought possible. Glenmore Technologies didn't just bounce back, it's transformed. The company that once relied on boardroom jargon and top-down decisions now thrived on trust, collaboration, and quiet wisdom. And at the center of that transformation stood a woman they had once dismissed with a smirked Ms. Loretta. The janitor who had once walked into a meeting with a mop and left with the attention of an entire executive team. The woman who dared to speak uncomfortable truths when no one else would. The quiet observer who saw what the leaders couldn't. Well, Tate-C, she never asked for credit, never asked for glory. But the legacy she left behind reshaped Glenmore in ways that no corporate rebranding ever could. The changes weren't just in performance metrics or employee surveys. They were in the little things, in how new hires were mentored by people who remembered how it felt to be overlooked, in how meetings always included a moment for real talk, not just results, in how every voice was invited to the table, regardless of title or pay grade. By the time Loretta retired, this time with a standing ovation, she had become something no one had expected. Glenmore's most unlikely and most beloved hero. But she didn't leave behind just memories. She left a legacy. Loretta Diet started with a small idea, Dalton. The CEO stood at the podium during the quarterly town hall meeting, 1 month after Loretta announced her retirement. Behind him was a slideshow filled with photos of Loretta walking the halls, laughing with employees, giving a thumbs up at the company picnic. He cleared his throat. "I think we owe someone more than a farewell," he said. "We owe her a reminder, one that lasts." He clicked the next slide. It was simple. October 12th, Loretta Day. That was the day she had walked into the boardroom with a mop and changed the direction of a company. From that year forward, Loretta Day became a Glenmore tradition. Every October 12th, the company paused. For 1 hour, no meetings, no emails, no PowerPoints. Just time spent listening. Managers met with interns over coffee. Executives shadowed frontline employees. Custodians and cafeteria staff were invited to speak at team huddles. And every year, one employee was honored with the Loretta Leadership Award, given not for rank, but for the kind of wisdom and courage Loretta embodied. It wasn't just a company event. It became part of the culture. A reminder, etched in practice, that leadership isn't always loud. Insight doesn't come with a corner office. And that respect must be earned, but also given, regardless of someone's title, age, or uniform. Quiet wisdom, lasting impact. Loretta never called herself a leader, but that's what made her one. She didn't try to impress anyone. Demand to be heard. She simply paid attention. She noticed what others missed because she looked where others did. In an age of big voices and bigger egos, Loretta was the exception. Soft-spoken, steady, and unshakably honest. She taught Glenmore and everyone in it that listening is leadership. Humility is strength. And sometimes the wisest voice is the one you almost didn't hear. When she left, her office was filled with notes not from executives, but from the mailroom, the tech support staff, the night shift, the cafeteria team. Each note said something different, but they all carried the same truth. You saw me. You listened. You reminded us we matter. a new way of seeing years later. When new employees toured Glenmore on their first day, they always stopped at the small display in the lobby. A framed photo of Loretta, mop in hand, smiling, beneath it a plaque read, "Never underestimate someone because of their title, age, or appearance. Sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones we've ignored for far too long." The HR guide would pause there and say, "This is Loretta. She wasn't just a janitor. She was the reason we're the company we are today." And every time new hires would look at the photo a little longer, something about it stuck, because everyone, at some point, has felt overlooked, underestimated, silenced, and Loretta's story reminded them that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. The final lesson, Loretta didn't change Glenmore with spreadsheets or slogans. She changed it with truth, with courage, with the simple power of seeing people and speaking up when it mattered most. She reminded a company that leadership is not a title, but an act of service. And even after her departure, her message echoed in every hallway. Never judge quiet wisdom. Never mistake silence for insignificance. And never forgets, sometimes the janitor sees the whole building more clearly than the CEO. Because once upon a Monday, a woman no one noticed walked into a boardroom, and everyone who laughed would never forget her name. Loretta was given a formal title, organizational culture consultant, but no one called her that. To everyone from interns to department heads, she was just Loretta. And that name, once passed over or dismissed, now carried real weight. She didn't move into a corner office. She didn't swap her sneakers for heels. Loretta walked the same halls she always had, but now people stopped to walk with her. She met with employees at every level, usually in break rooms or while walking with them between meetings. No clipboard, no formality, just conversation. She asked questions no one else had bothered to ask. What's the hardest part of your job right now? What do you love about working here? What would make you feel more valued? She listened on. More importantly, she acted. A junior developer confessed she'd been passed over for promotions despite training new hires. Within a week, the promotion criteria were rewritten. A customer service rep said that most clients canceled because they felt abandoned after onboarding. Loretta pushed for a new client success team that bridged sales and support cancellations. Dropped by half, she didn't reinvent the wheel. She just put it back on track, and the results spoke for themselves. Within 3 months, employee retention jumped 30%. People weren't just staying, they were engaged. Exit interviews turned into stay interviews. Departments once known for burnout became models of balance and collaboration. Clients started returning. One major client even admitted, "It finally feels like you're listening to us, not just selling to us." Productivity hit an all-time high, but not because people worked longer. Loretta had helped restructure workflows, eliminate useless meetings, and reallocate overloaded teams. Efficiency soared because people cared again. But perhaps the most profound change is the culture. Glenmore, once a place where fear ruled quietly beneath the surface, became a company known for transparency, empathy, and respect. Managers now open their meetings by asking, "What's one thing we can do better this week?" Executives began sitting in on team huddles, not to supervise, but to learn. People started thanking the cleaning crew by name, not because of Loretta, but because of what she stood for. One afternoon, Dalton found Loretta in the atrium, sipping tea and chatting with a pair of interns. He walked over, waited for her to finish her story, then said, "Do you remember when they laughed?" Loretta gave a small, knowing smile. "I do," she said. "But I remember what came next even more." Dalton nodded. "Out. They respect you now." Loretta looked out over the open-plan floor, where employees of every level worked side by side. "Respect is nice," she said. "But I didn't do this." "For that?" Dalton raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" She met his gaze. "Because this company matters. Because people here were drowning in silence. And someone had to speak." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. "You changed everything," he finally said. Loretta shook her head. "We did. You listened. That's where change starts." He nodded, humbled. As Dalton turned to leave, he paused and looked back. "Loretta, yes, I hope you know you're not the janitor anymore. She smiled, rising to her feet, mop handle in hand. Maybe not, she said, but I'll still help clean up. And so, Loretta became more than the woman who surprised the boardroom. She became the heartbeat of Glenmore Technologies, a symbol of listening, humility, and courage. A quiet force who once pushed a mop and ended up leading a company back to life. From laughter to respect, she changed the story. Became the story.